Okay, so we have just finished looking at the depressions and openings, as well as the projections of that you may find on bones. Those are the ones that are used for attaching of structures such as muscles, for passage of soft tissue structures such as nerves, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, okay, even muscles, okay. So those are what we were just looking at. So let us go ahead and talk in detail about the axioskeleton. Let us go ahead and talk in detail about the axioskeleton. We did mention that we have the entire skeleton is divided into the axioskeleton and the appendicular skeleton. We said that the axioskeleton is composed of those bones that protect the major organs of the body. So we have the bones that protect the major organs of the body, such as the brain, the spinal cord, the heart, the lungs. So we have that part of the skeleton, and that part of the skeleton is what forms the axioskeleton of this human being. On the other hand, we have the other part of the skeleton, which is the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is made up of bones of the limbs, the upper limb as well as the lower limb. So those two skeletons, those two are the parts of the skeleton. So the axioskeleton is made up of the skull, okay, which forms the cranial cavity, and the vertebral column, as well as the thoracic cavity, the ribs and the sternum. Those are the bones that make up the axioskeleton. So the bony framework of the head is made up of 22 bones. Okay, when you count all the bones of the head, they are 22 in number. But this is not to include the 3 ossicles that are found in the ears. Okay, this is not to include those 3 ossicles that are found in the ears. Okay, the bones of the skull are grouped into cranial bones and facial bones. The cranial bones are the ones that form the cranial cavity in which the brain is housed and protected. The cranial cavity is also known as the calvaria. Okay, the cranial cavity is also known as the calvaria. So the cranial cavity and the facial bones together, they make up the cranium. Okay, the cranial bones form the cranial cavity. Okay, this cranial cavity, like I said, encloses and protects the brain. Now these bones of the cranial cavity are 8 in number. They are 8 in number. Some of them are paired while others are not paired. They are 8 in number. Some of them are paired and others are not paired. So we have, first of all, we have the frontal bone, okay? We have the frontal bone. This frontal bone, the one in blue, this frontal bone, okay? This one in front is the one that makes up your forehead, okay? Part of the orbital cavity, and it goes all the way and all the way even beyond your hairline. Okay, this is the frontal bone. It is a single bone. It is not paired. Okay, when you look at another picture, we are going to look at this human being from the sides. From the sides. So from the lateral view, we are going to notice that this is our frontal bone. This is our frontal bone. And then immediately posterior to the frontal bone, we have two nice bones, okay? Two paired bones. We have two paired bones immediately posterior to the frontal bone. We have two nice bones, and these bones are called the parietal bones. So when you look at it, when you look at the person's scalp from the top, the posterior view, this is what you're going to see. We have the frontal bone, and then we have these two posterior parietal bones posteriorly, the one on the right and another on the left. Okay, they are paired. The other bone that you may want to be interested in will be this single bone, which is the one at the back, okay? This is known as the occipital bone, the occiput. This is where you're going to find this foramen through which the spine moves from the cranial cavity into vertebral cavity. And this is the occipital bone. It is the one that forms the occiput. It is a single bone. It is not paired. And then when you look at this same calvaria, you will notice that on the sides, you have this other bone which is in bush green. This bone which is in bush green is a paired bone. You're going to see it on this side and on the other side, on the left side and on the right side. This bone is known as the temporal bone. This bone is known as the temporal bone. So we have two paired temporal bones. We have a pair of temporal bones, one on each side of the calvaria. And then when you look towards the anterior aspect of the temporal bone, you're going to see this one which looks yellowish in color. This one is the wing of the sphenoid bone. The wing of the sphenoid bone, we have a bone which makes up the floor of the calvaria. When you look at this diagram here, we are looking at this human being when we have removed the lower jaw. So we are looking at it from the inferior aspect. We have removed the lower jaw and we're looking at this human being from the inferior aspect. And here we are able to see this yellow bone here, which is shaped like a butterfly. Okay, we are looking at this yellow bone here, which is shaped like a what? Like a butterfly. This bone, which is shaped like a butterfly, is the sphenoid bone. It will go all the way to the sides. It will send their wings to the side, and these wings will be shown even on the side when you remove the scalp of this human being. And so this is the small yellow parts that you're able to see here. That is the sphenoid bone. So those are the bones of the calvaria. We have two parietal bones, we have two temporal bones, we have one frontal bone, we have one occipital bone, we have one sphenoid bone, and we have an ethmoid bone. Okay, we also have an ethmoid bone located on the midline in the anterior part of the cranial floor, medial to the orbits. Okay, this one, I don't think I've seen it on this picture. Okay, I don't think I've seen it on this picture, but it also helps to form the floor of the cranium. It also helps to form the floor of the cranium. All right, that is one of the difficult bones to find, but it also makes the floor of contributes to the floor of the cranium. Okay, so those are the 8 cranial bones. So now we have the bones of the face, facial bones. Facial bones include nasal bones. We have 2 nasal bones. All right, we have two nasal bones, the ones that make up the bridge of the nose, the ones that make up the bridge of the nose, the nasal bones. So we have two nasal bones, one on each side of the nose, making up the nasal bones, the ones that make the bridge of the nose, these ones here. Those are the nasal bones. We have one maxilla, that is the one that makes up the upper jaw. The upper jaw of the human being is made up by the maxilla. So when you look at this picture, this bone here, okay, immediately posterior to the nasal bone, we have this bone here, which is in a lighter purple, and this is known as the maxilla. It is the one that helps to form the upper jaw. That is where the teeth of the upper jaw insert, okay? That is where the teeth of the upper jaw insert. Yeah, so that is where the teeth of the upper jaw insert. And then we have zygomatic bones. Zygomatic bones are those bones of the face that help us make the cheekbones. For us ladies, these are the ones we even put blush. Our cheeks are looking pink in color, okay? Or maybe we now put a highlighter, okay? We put concealer so that we make that makeup and so that our cheekbones can pop, okay? So that is our those are our zygomatic bones, okay? Those are our zygomatic bones. And then we have lacrimal bones. Lacrimal bones are found in the orbits. You look at those on the medial aspect of the orbit, those are lacrimal bones. We have one on each side, one on each side. So we have those lacrimal bones. And then we have the inferior nasal conchae. The inferior nasal conchae. So when you look at a picture like this one, you are going to notice that this person has been cut in two. Okay, in the sagittal plane, this person has been cut in half. The left side has gone on its own, the right side has gone on its own. We have cut this human being in half in the sagittal plane, and therefore we are able to look at the one half of this person's face. So when we look at this person's face, we are going to notice that on one side of the nostrils, you are going to see that there are these projections that look like they are shelves in the nasal cavity. So we have this one here, okay, and we have this one here, and we have that one here. So this inferior nasal conchae, that inferior nasal conchae, which forms a part of the inferior lateral wall of the nasal cavity. That is another bone of the face. And then we have the vomer, which forms the inferior portion of the nasal septum. We have the vomer, which forms the inferior portion of the nasal septum. Okay, we have the vomer here. So when you look at, this is a person again, we have cut this human being in the sagittal aspect, and so we are looking at but this is not a median sagittal portion, this is a parasagittal, not completely half. So we are able to see this vomer here in the middle of this patient's of the lower aspect of the nasal septum. And then we have the lower jaw. The lower jaw is also known as the mandible. The mandible is also known as the lower jaw. This one here, this is our lower jaw. Okay, this is our lower jaw. So that is the other face bone of the face. And then we have the nasal septum. This one divides the interior of the nasal cavity into right and left sides. Okay, in most cases, when you have a broken nose, then you are referring to the damage of this septum. Okay, you are referring to that. And then the other thing that you would want you to take note of is the orbits. When someone says orbits, we are talking about the sockets of the eyes. We're talking about the sockets of the eyes. Now, now that we have looked at the bones of the skull, the one other thing I would like us to look at are the joints, because now we understand that these bones are not one bone. So for them to be a lot and for them to be held together nicely like that, they are obviously joined at particular points along the skull. So those joints at which the bones of the skull connect to one another are known as the sutures. Those points at which the bones of the skull articulate with one another are known as sutures. We have several sutures in the skull. Some of the major sutures include the suture that join the frontal bone to the two parietal bones. The suture that joins the frontal bone, this frontal bone, this is the anterior aspect of this human being. If you can see there is a nose, all right? So the suture that joins the frontal bone to the two parietal bones is called the coronal suture. And then we have this suture here, which joins or articulates the two parietal bones. This is known as the sagittal suture, named according to the planes, those imaginary planes. And then we have this suture that articulates the occipital bone with the two parietal bones anteriorly, and that is known as the lambdoid suture. That is known as the lambdoid suture. When you come to the sides, okay, when you come to the sides, I told you that we have one, there is this wing of the sphenoid bone, all right, and then we have this temporal bone. This temporal bone articulates with the zygomatic bone. It articulates with the sphenoid bone. It articulates with the parietal bone superiorly. Posteriorly, it articulates with the occipital bone. This is when you are looking at this human being from the side. You have skinned this human being, you have removed the scalp, and therefore you're looking at this human being's scalp. So when you look at this temporal bone, it has parts, okay? It has parts. One, it has this projection which goes to articulate with the zygomatic bone. This projection is known as the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. Then it has this projection here. This projection is that portion of the bone that when you touch behind your ear, you are able to feel it behind your ear. This is known as the mastoid process. And then we have this small projection which is inside. You cannot feel it from the outside. This is known as the styloid process. Now, the other thing that we have to take note is this bone, because of these names, it is named, it has different parts, very distinct parts. There is this flat portion of the temporal bone. This is known as the squamous portion, because it is known as the squamous portion, and this squamous portion articulates with the parietal bone, okay? We are going to call this portion the squamous, we're going to call this suture the squamous suture, okay? And then we have this part that articulates with the sphenoid bone. Okay, we have this part which articulates with the sphenoid bone, and so because this is the squamous portion and this is the sphenoid bone, we are going to call this suture the sphenoesquamous suture. And then we have on the posterior aspect this mastoid bone, okay, this mastoid part of the bone of the parietal bone. And because this is the mastoid part of the temporal bone, and it is articulating with the parietal bone, we are going to call it the parietal mastoid suture on the posterior aspect. Okay, further on the posterior inferior aspect, we have the mastoid part of this temporal bone articulating with the occipital bone. And so we are going to call this suture the occipital mastoid suture. We are going to call it the occipital mastoid suture. One point that I would like you to go away with is this part where we have these four bones meeting. This is a very delicate area where the frontal bone, the sphenoid bone, the parietal bone, and the temporal bone meet. And this is a very, very delicate area. Once you are hit here, you will have a subdural bleeding. Subdural bleeding, okay? And that may lead to a subdural hematoma. So we have to be careful all the time. Okay, those are some of the sutures that I would want you to take note of. There are, like I said, there are a lot of other sutures, but for now you can go ahead and take note of that. In the same regard, I would like for you to take note of the spaces that are here when when a child is born. When a child is born, the bones of the skull are not completely fixed. They are not articulated as tightly as a person who is grown up. That is why when a child has increased intracranial pressure, their head starts swelling because these places, the sutures are not yet closed. Along the same sutures, we have in front here where the two parietal bones meet with the frontal bone. In the middle there, we have a space, a place there, okay, a triangular space there, which we are going to call these. All these spaces, by the way, that I'm talking about are going to be known as fontanels. Those are areas that are bigger than the actual sutures. Okay, these are areas where you can actually see the pulsating of the blood vessels under the skull of this baby. Under the skull of this baby, you are going to see the pulsating of this baby's pulse. And when that is happening, that is a normal thing for a baby. So the front part where there is this dilatation of the suture, where there is this dilatation of the coronal suture, this part is known as the anterior fontanel or the bregma, okay? And then we have on the posterior aspect, don't worry, you will look at this in detail when we start looking at embryology or maybe even in reproductive health. But at the posterior aspect, between the two parietal bones and the occipital bone, we have another part that is a dilated portion of the posterior suture of the suture on the back. And so you are going to find that that place is known as the lambdoid, the lambda, okay, that is the posterior fontanel. We have on the sides at the place where we're going to have a pterion, where that delicate place where those four bones meet, initially there is a fontanel known as the anterolateral fontanel. Same applies to the back. We have here what is known as the posterolateral fontanel. So those are the fontanels of this human being when they are still a child, when they are still a baby. That is what we are talking about. And then, now that we are done looking at the skull, let us go ahead and look at the vertebral column. Okay? Let us go ahead and look at the vertebral column.